Natalia Corduneanu is here to talk with us about a very interesting story, one that I picked up from the Washington Policy Center, so I should give them a shout out. You were a paralegal for the Attorney General's office, run by Attorney General Bob Ferguson. And this is an email that you sent out to everybody after an involuntary separation due to the COVID vaccine was determined. Now, Natalia, I'm going to ask you all the details in a second. I just want to read people what makes this particular case interesting, because there are a lot of people obviously who have been terminated from their positions, their state or city positions due to the COVID vaccine and not taking the COVID vaccine. But yours is interesting because you have family in Ukraine, you're Ukrainian, and you write here that during your meeting with the Deputy Attorney General, you requested to postpone your termination date until the 1st of July. You were working remotely, if I understand correctly. So there was no issue at the time because you were accommodated because you were working remotely. People were working remotely. But then this back to work notice came through. Everybody returns to work. And so then that's when the vaccination requirement, I guess, is then going to be enforced. You are told that you're going to be terminated from your position. You ask for a postponement. And this is why you say, I'm Ukrainian. A number of my family members are fighting for their freedom and risk their lives on a daily basis, to include my father. I explained that I wanted to have an opportunity to provide financial support to them during this difficult time for a few more months. My delay of termination was also denied a few days later. It is hard to explain with words how it made me feel. I did not even want to ask how a 3-month-long termination delay could inflict undue hardship upon the agency. Regardless of this, I stand strong, and with God's help, I will find other ways to support my family. So the reason this really caught my eye is because there's been a lot of public support from government officials in the United States, whether local, state, national, for Ukrainians. And then in your particular case, you're saying, hey, you have the opportunity to let me have my job for a couple more months so I can send my family money. And they say, sorry. So it makes me wonder, like in some of these cases, is it just a lot of lip service or do they really care? And I guess that's my first question to you. How do you look at that situation? Do you must notice how there's like this public campaign around you, the Seattle Great Wheel, they turned it the color of the Ukrainian flag. How do you, I guess, make sense of that in your mind that, here you are watching the support publicly, but, you behind the scenes ask for 3 extra months for your job to send money back to your family and it's denied?
Well, I see it as, utmost hypocrisy from Bob Ferguson. Last week, he posted a press release warning people who want to help Ukrainians how to avoid scammers and how to do it the right way, because there are so many people that want to help, and he's basically encouraging. Yet in my case, I asked for a 3 months delay, and I said this cannot be done. And really, I didn't even ask what undue hardship it's gonna, inflict on the agency. We've all been working remotely. The agency had been working remotely for the last 2 years, and I worked remotely, 100% remotely, for over a year now. Yet 3 more months is somehow undue hardship.
So what was their reason for telling you that they couldn't keep you for a couple more months?
No reason at all. When I requested this delay of termination, speaking with Todd Bowers, he told me this was his decision in accordance with our policies and procedures to terminate me. But when I asked Todd, would you be willing, to give me an extension, just 3 more months while I'm looking for a new job so I can support my family? Right away, he said, I don't know if I can do that. I need to make a few phone calls.
And then the phone calls just resulted in nothing, I guess.
And 3 days later, he called me and said, I'm sorry, we cannot do that.
I used to be a state employee. I worked for the Washington Department of Natural Resources. I was actually fired for interviewing people like you. My bosses told me that I was not allowed to speak in any way publicly, even on my own time, on my own social media that was not connected to my job. I was not allowed to speak in any way that they felt undermined their vaccine policy or their COVID policy. Or more importantly, really, because that was what I was doing more often, was talking to people like you and just letting you tell your story. So they didn't want me to publicly associate with anybody whose story would undermine their policy. So I lost my job too. So I know how it feels to be in a situation where you're trying to understand the logic, uh, and especially your rights as a government employee, as the government we think is supposed to abide by certain constitutional liberties. I don't know what
Yes.
that means anymore. But you write at the end of your letter that in writing this letter to all of you, my intent was to share my personal experiences with you, with a belief that you and the citizens of Washington state deserve to know that such things happen within our agency. Unfortunately, I am not the only one in the agency who had experienced similar treatment. It's hard to believe such decisions related to religious exemption accommodations were made without Attorney General Bob Ferguson's approval. So I am curious what you think, because he's the top guy, and I mean, I would assume that he could change that decision if he wanted to. What are your thoughts on how far up the chain, I guess, these decisions are being made?
I firmly believe it's his decision. And he's sort of going after people of faith specifically. Not a single religious exemption was accommodated. This was confirmed by our union representatives. A couple of weeks ago, when another colleague of mine was terminated for the same reason, she did reach out to our union representatives, and they told her in the email that as of that date, they had 12 people from the Attorney General's office who were terminated, and not, agency was not willing to continue accommodating them. There was only one person who, after the termination letter came in, decided to take the vaccine. So they were working that person through the process. And yes, to me, when Todd Bowers told me he needs to make a few phone calls to see if they can allow me to work for 3 more months, obviously he had to call either Chief Deputy Shane Esquivel or Bob Ferguson himself.
If you work for the government or anybody else, really, I have a way for you to see their bullshit better, and that's at betterspectacles.com/Allison. Betterspectacles.com is where I get my blue light blocking glasses. Blue light's assaulting us all day long. It's very inflammatory for our brain. When you're looking at devices like I am, you need to have blue light blocking technology, and most of it's crap. So go to betterspectacles.com/Allison, get some blue light blocking glasses that work. But also, if you're a progressive lens wearer, this is definitely the place you will get some relief. You can schedule a teleoptical appointment. They will help you with your prescription, and you will get 61% off of your progressive lenses. They have really helped my husband, who gets migraines from traumatic brain injury, and they specialize in very difficult prescriptions. They also have Rodenstock glasses. That's what these progressives are, Rodenstock frames. They're a company that's been in business for 144 years, and they've used 10 years of biometric research to customize these lenses for each customer. So go to betterspectacles.com/Allison, get yourself a pair of glasses that work, and let's continue on with the video. I don't know how much you can say about working at the Attorney General's office, but I'll ask this question anyway. When I was a reporter, before I worked for the state, for the Department of Natural Resources, I was a reporter at King 5 at the NBC affiliate in Seattle, which maybe you watch sometimes. And I covered the environment, and there were a lot of times where my particular beat would cross over with Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General's work, whether he was suing Monsanto or something else. And whether I was working for the news or working for the state, there were just certain times, certain stories of that I would hear, whether from other state officials, people that were connected, some folks doing investigations, that behind the scenes, there was a lot of politics at work with how that office would choose, like, who it's going to prosecute, who it's going to protect, and it didn't necessarily run by just kind of like everybody's treated equal under the law. Are you able to comment on that at all?
Actually, I will comment on that.
Okay, please do.
Yes, what you're saying is true. Don't get me wrong. There is a lot of work that's very important that the office is doing, and it's good work. It's needed. But at the same time, there are so many cases that Bob Ferguson handpicks. So that just makes him look better in the eyes of certain groups of citizens, let's say LGBTQ or veterans. He handpicks the cases to prosecute. I took a 2-year break in my employment after I had my second child, and I came back to the same division, Consumer Protection, last February. And I did notice a lot of changes in how the office operates. I think these changes didn't happen overnight, they were slow. But for somebody who left and then came back, it was very obvious and noticeable. Attorneys no longer had any discretion in how they run their cases, in how they didn't have any discretion in the procedural matters, how to pursue a case. All they were thinking and talking about in meetings, is Bob gonna like what we are doing? Is what we are doing, is this something that Bob would endorse? Or is it something that, how he would run this case? The office is being run as his personal private law firm these days. Another example of whom he hires. He hires people, upper management, based on their political views. I'm not gonna name any names here, but a new manager who was hired had her first meeting with the support staff, and in that first meeting, we're being told that she only came to the AGO from private practice to litigate Trump cases. I really don't care if you come to litigate Trump cases or Clinton cases. I just think it's wrong to come to AGO where you're supposed to, protect the public interest. But at the same time, you only come here to further your political agenda. This is wrong.
That's very much aligned with a lot of the stuff that I was hearing and seeing myself with like certain cases that wouldn't go through because they were, in a certain kind of class of people, I guess, that Ferguson didn't want to look bad with or offend. And then other people that he had no problem going after, or just like constantly filing lawsuits against Trump when there were other issues maybe that had sort of more of an effect or were closer to home, that you're just kind of like wondering, why isn't he working on that? Why is he so fixated on the Trump administration? So I that's why I asked, because I definitely had heard a lot about that. Let me ask you about the vaccines and the accommodations and whatnot. I've heard that at a lot of departments, they were granting the exemptions, but just not accommodations. And you're saying, though, that your exemption was not granted, or so when you were working remotely, was it just they hadn't made a decision about it yet?
So my exemption was granted.
Okay.
Back in the fall of 2021, when I applied, like a month later or so, I received a letter from HR saying that my exemption is granted. The next step in the process is to engage with HR and your managers and supervisors to find a reasonable accommodation for you.
Right.
I had that one meeting with HR. We discussed some things like what I would be willing to do once we go back to in person. So we did talk about me maybe getting weekly testings, social distancing, that I would be maybe isolating in my office as much as possible, wearing a mask, washing my hands frequently, things like that. And they didn't seem to have a problem with it at that time. However, we all were in mandatory telework status. And at that time, I was told that this is my accommodation for now. We will have another meeting when we get closer to the reopening date. That second meeting actually never took place. The only meeting I had after that was with Todd Bowers, who told me that I'm being terminated. He did mention that they were looking at some other positions within the agency that would allow for 100% telework. And I was also told that they didn't find such position for me, which I honestly don't think there was a process for that. Nobody ever told us of this. Nobody ever told us that they are looking at other positions to accommodate us. I know in other agencies, when people wanted to be, reassigned, they had to actually go officially through that process, apply and express interest that they would like to be, reassigned. That never actually took place in our office. We were never told that we even have this process of potential reassignment. The other thing,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Another colleague of mine who was fired at the beginning of February, she reached out to me after I sent the email to my colleagues at the AGO. At that time, she was no longer working there, but she was running the department that was essential to the AGO during the COVID pandemic. They were processing outgoing mail requests, processing all incoming mail, arranging for payments, cars. Basically, while we all were teleworking, they were in the office running the operations. And she was managing that department. She was also fired. However, her firing was absolutely outrageous. Back in the fall 2021, she had a call from Chief Financial Officer of the agency who directly asked her, what is she going to do about the COVID vaccine? And she replied to him that she doesn't feel comfortable taking it and she is going to exercise her religious freedom. To which he replied right there on the spot that, oh, okay, now I'll have to figure out how the agency is going to live without you. Basically telling her that she will be terminated before she even applied for a religious exemption. Yeah. This was their plan all along. They never intended to engage in any meaningful accommodation process for religious exemptions. Mm-hmm. They had this plan from the beginning that, for now we're going to leave these employees alone while we're all teleworking. When it gets closer, we'll start taking them one by one. So to keep it quiet, we are going to terminate all of them. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah. However, they accommodate people with medical exemptions, and that accommodation is telework. They accommodate people with no exemptions at all. People who have, let's say, sick parents that live with them or with compromised immune system. They allow these people to continue teleworking, not to jeopardize their relatives' health at home. They don't have to go back to the office.
It does appear to be very political and also inconsistent. And I agree with you. My experience also was that there was no plan. It was very much seemed like a charade to kind of maybe cross legal loopholes, cross the T's and I's to try to prevent being sued, which I also wonder if your office, if the Attorney General's office sort of behind the scenes working with the other state departments, like, well, if the AG's office is doing it, everybody else basically gets to do it, right? And they're going to be the attorney for all the other offices too, paid
Yes.
for by our tax dollars. I know you're sitting here thinking, I need a good glass of wine to get through the rest of this video. And guess what? I have just the drink for you. Go to AllisonWinePromo.com, AllisonWinePromo.com, and get 50% off of my favorite Malbecs. These are very, very special wines. One is from a very high altitude vineyard, almost 9,000 feet in Argentina, and has a very robust flavor because of how hard the grapes work at that elevation. Another one from the oldest vineyard in Argentina, and another that uses natural fermentation. Again, 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. You can have a great glass of Malbec and support my work while you're at it. For all you coffee drinkers who are sitting there thinking, I need some caffeine because I'm thinking I live in an alternate universe listening to this story, you should go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. That's twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. Get yourself a high altitude USDA certified organic Nicaraguan roast. They have light roast, dark roast, medium roast, and they also have a Caturra tea, which is tea that you make from the coffee fruit. You can hot brew or cold brew. I cold brew mine for 24 hours. It's very good. The founder and CEO of the company lives right there in Nicaragua, where they grow, harvest, and roast the beans. It's a small family-owned company. I drink the product myself. I really like it. So toast to free speech, whether you're drinking AllisonWinePromo.com or TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, and make sure you can see your drink well at BetterSpectacles.com/Allison. And thanks again for watching. I was just told directly that nobody that had any interface at all or possibility of interface with the public was going to be granted an accommodation. And I said, then why would you have people file an exemption? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Why not just tell them they're fired instead of making people go through the process of writing these long exemption requests and everything? If you weren't going to give them accommodation anyway, and she said, I don't know the answer. So that's totally my experience too. It was just kind of like this thing they did, like to make people feel good, or like I said, to just protect themselves legally. But I don't think there was ever a plan in place to accommodate. At least that's my experience, and I haven't come across anybody either who had that resolved. So I don't know, maybe they're out there. They could leave a comment in the comment section if they're seeing this. So Natalia, let's go to why you wanted to delay the termination. Tell me a little bit about your family and yourself and your work with the AG's office. I guess, how did you get into that kind of work, and does that affect, I guess, the way you're looking at stuff right now? Like, you're obviously into the legal world, so I'm just curious how you got interested in that, and tell me a little about your family in Ukraine.
Well, I always was interested in the legal profession, and I wanted to be a prosecutor back home in Ukraine when I was in high school. But due to some circumstances, I started school that wasn't like a law school, and then I got the opportunity to travel the world. So I traveled a little bit. I came to the United States as an exchange student, and I met this great guy here that I just wanted to marry. And that's kind of how I ended up in the United States. I didn't finish I didn't pass the last exam at my university in Ukraine. So basically, I completed a 4-year program to have a bachelor's degree, but I don't really have a bachelor's degree because I didn't show up for my last exam because I was in the United States. But then later, I decided that I still want to pursue my dream. If it's not going to be a law school, I decided let me try for a paralegal certificate. So I went back to school here, attended Tacoma Community College, and got my paralegal certificate. And then right after graduating, I was hired by the Attorney General's office. I started as a legal assistant. And then I got promoted twice within a year and a half, I believe. But I have all my family is still in Ukraine. My mom, my dad, my aunt, my grandmother, everybody. and it's a scary time right now to live there.
Where
Honestly, I
exactly
don't
are
know if
they?
I'll. They are a little southwest of Kiev, about 120 miles from Kiev. Um, my father enlisted as soon as the war started. He joined the territorial defense, and he works on securing strategical objects within the region. However, he told me a few days ago they are moving them somewhere else for training, and then further probably to the front line. I don't really know next time I go home if I'm gonna see everybody alive.
Did you tell the Attorney General's office all of this stuff?
Um, well, yeah, during my meeting with Todd Bowers, I did explain to him the reasons why. Um, and I had great support from my colleagues in the AGO. I had people who no longer work there, who retired. They were reaching out to me and asking how they can help, where they can donate for, you know, to the armed forces of Ukraine, for humanitarian aid. I've had great support from my colleagues, honestly, not from the management.
Okay, back real fast to your family. So you told us about your dad. Tell me a little bit about your mom and the rest of your family members, and have they evacuated? Are they still there? And what is daily life like for them right now? How close are they to the conflict too?
So my city was bombed a few times at the beginning of the invasion. That was primarily the city's airport is completely destroyed. Couple of military bases were hit. That was the early morning on day one of the invasion. Then my city also hosts the control center for the Ukrainians air forces. That's pretty much in the center of the city, and that was bombed like last week. Then another facility that I don't know exactly, either stores or refines oil. There was a huge fire there, and air raid sirens are wailing daily, day and night. Some days are better, my mom says. Some days it's constantly, and they have to hide in the cellar. The first couple of weeks, I believe, were the hardest. They had spent a lot of time in the cellar at night.
When you were talking about sending money home and the importance of your job for that reason, what what's at risk with your ability or your lack of ability, I guess, to continue doing that? Like what were you helping your family do with the finances that you were sending them?
Uh, my first and foremost task, as I see it, my duty to help my family in this situation is to secure that, they have enough funds to provide food, shelter for themselves, especially in the event if they have to evacuate. And my cousin, she has a 3-year old, and she could not stand living after these constant air sirens. When they were bombing the airport, she was standing outside with her 3-year old, and they saw these rockets flying over their head, and she was very scared. She decided to leave. She left to Poland. So she's in Poland now, and I talked to her a few times. Things also don't seem very good there. People are very welcoming and receiving of them, but it is very hard to find a job there.
Hmm.
All men who were sort of from Ukraine working in Poland, they left back. They went back to Ukraine to fight. So all these vacancies left by them, they need to be filled with men. This is hard labor on factories, plants, assembly lines that women can't really do. So she struggles there right now to find a job, and I don't know what she's gonna do about that. But at least she's safe for now.
Right. It's so I don't even know what it would be like. I can't imagine what it would be like to go to a completely different country.
And there is
I mean,
language barrier as well.
yeah, language. I mean, just that alone. And then all of a sudden, like all the documentation you would need to get a job. Where is she living right now? Is she at a refugee camp or does she have a place to
Um,
live?
she has a place to live. A very kind person in Poland gave them an apartment. It's a two-bedroom apartment, and there are four families living there.
Wow.
And they don't charge them anything, not nothing for rent, nothing for utilities. They just
Amazing.
live there. Yeah.
This is just a short clip of a full video that has basically been sanitized so it can fly under the radar on YouTube. If you want to see the entire conversation that we had or the entirety of the commentary that you're watching, please go to one of my other platforms. One of the best places to go is AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can become part of my editorial board and pose questions ahead of time for interviews. You also get exclusive live streams there as well. But whatever you do, don't stay here on YouTube. The full truth is somewhere else.